Change me, Lord, to be more like you. I forget to buckle my helmet sometimes. Sue me. Excuse the camera angle if it sucks. This is my first time doing an actual moto vlog with this front mount. And I don't really like re-recording moto vlogs, so I'll probably post it even if it kind of sucks. This is my 2017 Harley Roadster. I've got, let's see, 122 miles on it, and it's awesome. If you've never seen my channel before, I ride sport bikes. I prefer small sport bikes. I have a KTM RC390, which I may or may not be selling. And my first ever bike was a Ninja 250. I've had older style motorcycles before, such as a 72 Yamaha AT2, and I had like a 71 CB175. Sorry, I was distracted. I was speeding a lot and I thought that cop was after me, and he didn't care apparently. I love the battlefield police. So I'm used to smaller sport bikes. I've ridden bigger sport bikes. I've ridden different cruisers, standards. I usually gravitate towards small sport bikes. The Harley Roadster came out and I thought it was amazing. It spoke to me, not literally, but it just looks incredible. I took a test ride, it felt incredible. So I got one. It's really sporty for a Harley. The only sportier Harley was the XR 1200, which I did think about after I test rode this, but I just think they look kind of ugly. It is a Sportster, and they've been making the Sportster since the early 50s, I think. It's like the longest running line of motorcycles ever. So this review of this bike is going to come from the perspective of a sport bike rider, which you don't see very often. Right off the bat, this thing is so comfortable. This thing makes my RC390, even the Ninja 250, seem like a giant inclined block of wood. It's comfortable, dude. If you're coming from like a cruiser or something, you're not gonna think this is comfortable, but if you're coming from a sport bike, you're gonna think this is the best thing since sliced bread. I can't imagine that I wouldn't be able to ride hundreds of miles on this thing. My KTM, it's a struggle to even get across town to college in the mornings. My butt is aching. It's crazy. Speaking of comfort, the bars, they're pretty low. There are some pretty low bars. They remind me of the bars on the Thruxton. The seat is higher than other Sportsters, other Harleys, and you've got mid controls. You can put rear sets on it, rear controls. I have no desire to do that because this is pretty comfortable as is, and it's probably ergonomics wise extremely similar to a Ninja 250. Like, that's the lean you're doing, except, you know, more comfortable seat and everything. But yeah, the lean reminds me a lot of my Ninja 250 when I had it. You're not leaned over too much, but it's still noticeably sporty. The mid controls are nice. I like them, except the shifter peg is way up here. Like way up. Usually it's in line, so you just boop, blip your foot up and it's done. But on this, you manually have to lift up your foot, kick it down, or move your foot over, shift it up, because it's so high up, and these the foot pegs are so wide. So that's sort of annoying, but it's easy to get used to. The brake pedal is not as bad. Shifting on it is not as clunky and uncomfortable as I thought it was going to be. The RC390, when you first get it, the shifting's terrible. You got to break it in. The shifting is kind of clunky at first, but after the first 100 miles, it seemed to soften up, and I bet it will even more after I do my first service. And I really like the clunk, actually. It's really positive. You know for sure that you're in gear. You change gears. It's really good feedback, and I like it. This bike, you feel like you're in the bike when you're riding it. It's really nice. Grom! You feel like you're in the bike when you're riding it. On most sport bikes I've had, I feel like I'm sitting on top of the bike, which technically you are, but I don't like that. I like to feel part of the bike. I like to be in the bike, and this does that. Suspension. I like the suspension. A lot of reviews say the suspension is bad, but honestly I really like it. It's really stiff. It's got upside down front forks, which is nice, sporty. It's got preload adjustable rear shocks. They're taller than any other Harley shocks, I believe, and they have more travel. They're pretty stiff, but for some reason my RC390 had a really soft suspension. I probably should have adjusted it. Coming from a cruiser, you're not going to like the suspension. If you're coming from a sport bike, you're going to think it's pretty on par, because it is. It's stiff and it's sporty. If you hit a big bump, it's not gonna be super comfortable. It doesn't soak up bumps like cruisers would, because it's not a cruiser, honestly. It's not meant to be a cruiser. It's a sporty standard type bike. Still on comfort, we'll talk about the vibration. Everyone knows Harleys vibrate. It's a V-twin engine. It's gonna vibrate. But the thing is, I was expecting it to vibrate so much more. It's weird. People talk about it all the time, like it's the downfall of Harleys. Yeah, I wouldn't say they vibrate. I'd say they rumble. The KTM, it was a single-cylinder sport bike. It vibrated. This thing rumbles. Right now you can see it's all shaking and rumbling. You really only feel it in your feet. They do a really good job of rubber mounting the engine, but your feet are right by the engine, so you really only feel it in your feet. And like I said, the KTM vibrates. It's like you can feel it. It's like a high frequency vibration, so it's kind of annoying. It's a lower frequency vibration. It's not a big deal. If you come from super smooth Japanese sport bikes, though, you're gonna notice it. And if you're sensitive, you're probably not gonna like it. But if you're sensitive, you probably shouldn't be getting a Harley. No, I'm kidding. The power on this thing, again, it's kind of a cruiser, but it's not. And it's got a big engine. It's got a lot of torque. It's got decent horsepower in the 70s for both. It'll go. It's faster than my RC390. And it'll get up and go. I think it has a sub 4 second 0 to 60. I'll test it sometime, but that's what I've heard. She's a big engine and she's got power. She'll jerk you back with that torque. I am 100% sure this thing will wheelie pretty easily. Back to the vibrations, it's pretty noticeable whenever you're at idle. You're just stopped here. And then when you're riding, it's not bad until you get over 4,000 RPM, and then it starts to vibrate some more. It sounds great. It just sounds awesome. I hate loud bikes. I hate it when guys have super loud Harleys. I think it's obnoxious. I think it's annoying. I think it gives motorcyclists a bad name. Does it sound awesome? Yeah, but it's loud and it's annoying. Stock configuration pipes on this thing, awesome. It sounds great. It's not very loud. Do I want different pipes on it? Yeah, I kind of do, because these are super heavy. But I literally can't find any that aren't loud for this bike. So if anybody has any suggestions, let me know. Speaking of heavy, the bike is heavy. It's 560 pounds wet, I think, compared to the heaviest bike I've owned, which was the Ninja 250, which is not a heavy bike. Like 380 pounds maybe. It's noticeable, especially when you're pushing it around. But when you're riding around, this bike is so nimble. It surprised me so much. I always thought that a heavy bike would be super annoying and it would be bad handling and it wouldn't be for me. But this thing, really, weight isn't a factor when you're riding. It's not, except whenever you're riding on highways and stuff. This thing is stable. Going through corners, this thing is stable. The wind has little effect on you, which was not something I could say about my sport bikes. One footing it like this, having one foot on the ground, it's kind of tough to do sometimes because I'm not used to it being so heavy. Putting both feet on the ground and not touching any of the brakes, it was easy to keep the sport bikes controlled like that, but not this. It's too heavy. You start rolling backwards or forwards, you gotta have something on the brakes, which is good to do anyway. This thing's real fast. Redline 6,000 RPM, which is way lower than sport bikes, but again, different engine, different purposes, different characteristics. It's fast. It doesn't seem as fast as it is sometimes because it revs really slow. But that's good, because if it revved as fast as a sport bike does, you'd be at 6,000 in an instant and you'd have to shift all the time. But it revs slow because it's a big engine, it's got a big old flywheel. The dash layout is awesome. I love it. It's clean, it's simple. You've got like your indicator lights down here, neutral light, bright, oil level or pressure, whatever it is. And then on the actual gauge, up top is your RPM gauge, your tachometer, which is nice. I like a digital speedo and then a manual tach. The speedometer is small right there. There's a clock underneath, and then this button right here, it'll cycle through. You can have your trip meters, you can have a digital RPM gauge also. What else? Your mileage, of course. The time. The signals are on both sides, the buttons for them, and they're self-canceling. It takes a little bit of getting used to have them on both sides. Whenever your throttle is twisted, it kind of sucks to hit that, but it's okay. It's no big deal. The light, the LCD display is it's kind of light in the daytime. People are complaining about not being able to see it and such. You can see it just fine. I've never had a time when I was struggling to see it. It gets really light, but you can still see it. There's a little gear indicator on the right side of the speedometer, and it tells you what gear you're in. It goes off whenever you pull in the clutch for some reason, which is kind of annoying, but no big deal really. Then there's a ton of space on the left side of the Speedo over here, where there's nothing. And this bike does not have a fuel gauge. It has a fuel light on the tach. It doesn't have a fuel gauge. I feel like they could have easily plopped a little fuel gauge right there and it would have been so much better, because this is only a 3.3 gallon tank, which is bigger than the KTM's tank, but still the KTM gets much better gas mileage. And whenever the light comes on, you have 0.8 gallons left, or 4/5 of a gallon. So do the math accordingly, and hopefully you can get to a station, because there's no reserve. All the bikes I've owned that I've ridden on the street have had fuel gauges, so that's something for me to get used to. Looks of this bike looks incredible. One of the best looking bikes I've ever seen in stock configuration. Kudos. Everything feels very well made. It's nice, good construction, well made, great parts, good paint. The only thing that feels cheap is the key slot over here for your ignition. It feels kind of cheap, and it's hard to get the key in. Same thing for the fork lock, or the whatever it's called, locks the handlebars, you know. Usually that's integrated into the ignition on sport bikes, but it's not on this. It feels really flimsy, kind of cheap, which then you have to worry about theft if you have a crappily made ignition cylinder. And then also when turning the key to accessory or ignition position, I rhymed. There's no positive feedback. It doesn't really click. So you just turn it and you're like, oh, I hope it worked. Engine 1200 cc's, if you didn't know already. It's a V-twin. Technically it's 1202 cc's. A lot of torque, a lot of power. It'll pull you back in any gear, any RPM. The mirrors rock. I've never had a bike where I can actually see behind me until now. The brakes, oh, the brakes. Dual disc front brakes. I've never owned a motorcycle with dual disc front brakes, and it stops, let me tell you. They're probably not the best in the world, but compared to what I've usually had, it stops you. The rear brake's good too. One thing I definitely don't like is where the mid-controls are placed. I've driven mid-control motorcycles before, and you can put your feet down just fine, but these are literally right where you would put your feet down, and you're gonna hit your legs, you're gonna hit your shins, and it's kind of annoying. You have to make sure you put them behind the pegs, because you can't put them in front. It doesn't work. Not really a huge deal, but when you're first getting used to it, it's annoying. Maintenance on this bike is going to be awesome. No valve adjustments or clearance checks. Hydraulic self-adjusting valves. That's the best news I've ever heard. Sport bikes, the KTM especially, you have to adjust the valves all the time, or at least check them, and it's a long process. It's expensive if you have somebody else do it. Spark plugs, right there. You want to change them, boom. It's like a 5-minute job. That's awesome. KTM, you had to basically take the whole bike apart to get to the one spark plug. Any other maintenance, the engine is just all visible. There's not even an oil drain plug, like in the traditional sense. It's like a little tube, and you just loosen the clamp and then pull the plastic piece out and it drains. That is convenient. And then the oil reservoir is over here, and it's really easy to get to. It's got a nice big hole to pour the oil into. The clutch, I've heard it's heavy, but I think it's actually pretty normal, pretty standard weight of pull. The KTM had, again, a pretty heavy clutch, but if you're putting it in neutral when you come to stops, which you probably should be anyway, then you shouldn't have any problems. Still getting used to downshifting on this thing. It's a little different than on sport bikes. It's a little tougher to do, but it's no big deal. I'll get used to it. People look at this thing all the time. People talk to me about it. I go into a store, come out, people are hovered around it. They ask me questions about it. It's a new bike. It came out last summer. Not a lot of people have it. Plus, it's a Harley. People love Harleys. I don't really love the Harley name, but this bike is just awesome. I don't really care about name. If you come out with a bike that I love and that looks great, performs well, reliable, I'll get it. Neutral was so hard to find at first, and I found that on most Harleys it's hard to find, but after about 50 miles I got used to it, or it loosened up, and I can usually find it first try. Going up from first, but going down from second I still have trouble. Throttle is nice and responsive. It snaps back when you let it go. It works. It's a throttle. I haven't driven it at night yet, but the light seems pretty bright. Pretty dang bright. You can always get the day maker, which I wouldn't get because it's way too expensive. You just get the fake one they sell on Amazon, and it works just the same, looks just the same. I got the denim black color. How you wash it is you just wipe it off with ammonia-based cleaner or dish soap. Pretty easy maintenance-wise, but it's, if you rub on it, like where the seat rubs on it right here, I took the seat off and it's shiny there. So if you rub on it, it's gonna get shiny. If you nick it, you can't buff it out, it's nicked. That's the drawback. They say it's one of the benefits of this paint scheme, but they just say that because they want to sell it. But I imagine painting over it would be pretty easy, and I hear John Deere Blitz black paint is pretty much a exact match, or you can get some at the Harley shop. I bet you just spray paint it on a light coat and it's fixed. It probably blends itself pretty well. I haven't tried to scratch it or anything, and I'm not going to, but the paint does seem pretty tough. Although there are a few like little scuffs on it that didn't come off when I last cleaned it, and those were there when I bought it, probably from other idiots test riding it. It's whenever it gets scuffed or scratched, it turns gray, so it's very obvious. I didn't want this color. My first choice was the billet silver with the black racing stripe down the middle. This whole area right here was one black racing stripe. The dealership I was going to buy it from, they were dicking me around, bending me over a barrel. So I got this one instead. It was between this and the red one because I don't like shiny black. It's just too plain, too common for me. The red one, oh, it's a beautiful red color, but I don't know, just something about the red and then the rest of the bike being like blacked out with some chrome here and there. Yeah, it just didn't appeal to me that much. This bike looks mean as flat black. Taking this thing in the curves is amazing. I lean over on this farther than I've leaned over on any sport bike, and again, I think it's that weight. The weight of the bike is very confidence inspiring, like I said, even in the corners. And you can just lean it and you can feel stable, and you trust the bike, and it just works. This thing is great. It's sporty. It's awesome. If you're coming from a cruiser and you want it because it looks cool, you're probably not going to like it, honestly. It's going to be too uncomfortable. It's going to be too sporty. If you're coming from a sport bike and you want something a little more comfortable, a little different, but still sporty, still fun, this is the perfect bike for you. If you want something with that kind of cafe look, kind of custom look, perfect for you. If you're expecting a sport bike, if you're a sport bike guy and you want another sport bike, but you think this looks cool and you're like 1200 engine, it'll work. You're not gonna like it. It's not as fast as a sport bike, like a Super Sport or a 600 or anything like that. It's not supposed to be as fast as those. It's not as good in the corner as those. You're not going to like it if you're expecting it to be. But altogether, I'd say this is an incredible bike. Looks great. Feels good to ride. It's fun, it's quick, it's nimble. And if you have any questions, post them down below. I'll answer. Thanks for watching.